The Legend of Nasrudin. A certain crafty villain was entrusted with the education of a number of orphans. Observing that children have certain strengths and weaknesses, he decided to take advantage of this knowledge. Instead of teaching them how to acquire a skill in learning, he told them that they already possessed it. Then he insisted upon their doing some things and refraining from others, and thus kept most of them blindly subject to his direction. He never revealed that his original commission had been to teach them to teach themselves. When these children grew up, he noticed that some had detached themselves from his authority, despite all his efforts, while others remained bound to it. He was then entrusted with a second school of orphans. From these he did not directly demand obedience and respect. Instead, he enslaved them to his will by telling them that mental culture was the sole aim of education and by appealing to their self-pride. The mind, he told them, will give you universal understanding. This must be true, thought the children. After all, why should we not be able to solve all problems by ourselves? He supported the doctrine by demonstrations. This man, he said, is enslaved by his emotions. What a disastrous case! Only the intellect can control the emotions. That other man, however, is ruled by his intellect. How much happier he is, how free from emotional frenzy. He never let the children guess that there was an alternative to the choice between emotions and intellect, namely intuition, which could, however, be overcome or blurred by either of these, and always dismissed its appearance as irrelevant coincidence or guesswork. There are two kinds of habit, one derived from mere repetition, the other from intuition harnessed both to the emotions and to the intellect. But since intuitive habit is associated with true reality, this villainous old man simply abolished it in favor of repetitive habit. Some of the children, nevertheless, suspected that certain miraculous aspects of life did not fit into his fragmentary pattern, and asked him whether there was not, perhaps, something else undisclosed, some secret power. He told one group of questioners, "Certainly not. Such a notion is superstitious and due to faulty mental processes. Do not put any value on coincidence. Coincidence means no more than accident, which, though perhaps of emotional interest, lacks all intellectual significance." To another group he said, "Yes, there is more in life than you will ever know, because it cannot be acquired by honest extension of the scientific information which I gave you, or which you managed to collect under my direction." But he took care that the two groups did not compare notes, and so realized that he had given two contradictory answers. Now, from time to time, when the children reported inexplicable events to him, he consigned these to oblivion as having no scientific relevance. He knew that, without taking stock of intuition, the children would never escape from the invisible net in which he had bound them, and that the intuitive knowledge of secrets excluded from their education could be won only when they were in a certain harmony of mind with the emotions. So he taught them to ignore variations in their mental condition, for once they discovered that powers of apprehension vary from hour to hour, they might guess how much he had concealed from them. His training confused their memory of such intuitions as they had been granted, and they were willing to think along the logical lines he had prepared for them. The children whom this villain had mistaught in his first school were now grown up, and since he had let them come nearer to understanding the true nature of life, certain casual remarks that they made to members of the second school disturbed their faith in scientific truth. So he hastily gathered those of the first school who still remained loyal to him, and sent them out to preach incomprehensible doctrines purporting to explain the hidden mechanism of life. Then he directed the attention of the second school to these teachers, saying, "Listen carefully, but never fail to use your intellect." The intellectual children soon found that there was nothing to be learned from these doctrines, and said, "They contradict logic. Only with logic are we on firm ground. Yet some members of the first school, who had broken away from the old villain's teaching, reproached them, saying, "We too reject these doctrines, but that they fail to explain the secret mechanism of life of which you are in search does not deny its existence." They answered, "Can you then put the secret in logical terms?" but were told that to do so would be to deny its truth. So they protested, "Nothing is true that cannot face the cold light of reason." A few, however, cried out, "We are ready to believe everything you tell us. We think you are wonderful." But they were as hopelessly lost as the intellectual children and the teachers of the incomprehensible doctrine, because they trusted only to a slavish credulity, not to the habit of intuition. A state of educative chaos supervened. So many different ways of thought were current that it was often said, "I cannot trust anyone. I must find out for myself by the exercise of my supreme will." The old villain, who had bred this confusion, thrived on it like a madman rejoicing in deeds of violence. Especially his cult of the intellect encouraged egotism and discord, and to those who still felt an inner uncertainty, a sense of incompleteness, or a hankering for something whole and true, he said, "Distract your minds by ambition." He taught them to covet honours, money, possessions, sexual conquests, to compete with their neighbours, to immerse themselves in hobbies and diversions. It is said that when a horse cannot find grass, it will accept hay. For want of the green grass of truth, they accepted the dry hay with which he filled their mangers. The old man devised more and more distractions for them: vogues, crazes, lotteries, fashions in art, music, and literature, sporting competitions, and all kinds of achievements which offer them temporary relief from this sense of lack. They were like a patient who accepts palliatives from his physician because he assures them that his disease is incurable. Or they were like the monkey and the crabapple. He clutched the crabapple inside a bottle, but the neck was too narrow for him to withdraw his hand and the crabapple too. Unable to escape because he was hampered by the bottle, he was soon captured and put into a sack. But he proudly cried, "I still have the apple." The fragmentary view of life forced on mankind by the old villain was now accepted, and the few people who tried to point out where truth really lay were thought insane and readily refuted by the old argument, "If what you say is true, then prove it to us logically." False coin is accepted only because true coin exists, and deep in their hearts many people knew this. But they were like children born in a house from which they had never been allowed to stray, doomed to walk from one room to another without knowing that there could be another house elsewhere, with different furnishings and a different view from its windows. Nevertheless, the tradition that true coins exist, that there is another house, and that some horses eat grass, not hay, survived in a book which was not a book, delivered by direct succession from an ancient sage to one of his descendants named Hussein. Hussein searched the world until he found the man who, through craft and guile, would give the teaching of this book fit expression, namely the incomparable Mullah Nasruddin. Thereupon this book, which was not a book, was interpreted by the actions of a mullah who was no mullah, who was both wise and a fool, who was both a man and many men. And the teaching was thus brought to the attention of the children who had been misled. Mullah Nasruddin broke out of the net which had been cast by the old villain. For how can one burn a book which is not a book? How can one name a fool who is no fool? How can one punish a man who is a multitude? How can one strike a man who is oneself? Study the adventures of Mullah Nasruddin, plumb the depth of the subtleties. He is like a tree which has nourishment in its roots and an edible sap, whose leaves are potherbs, whose flowers, fruit, branches, and seeds are all variously the same. Can a tree be a man, or a man a tree? The Sufi Quest by Ustad Hilmi Mevlevi. Man, we say we know, originates from far away. So far, indeed, that in speaking of his origin, such phrases as beyond the stars are frequently employed. Man is estranged from his origins. Some of his feelings, but not all of them, are slight indicators of this. This is why we speak of separation from the beloved, but these are technical terms, and those who employ them to increase their emotional life are increasing their emotional life. Man has the opportunity of returning to his origin. He has forgotten this. He is, in fact, asleep to the reality. Sufism is designed as the means to help awaken man to the realization, not just the opinion, of the above statements. Those who waken are able to return, to start the journey, while also living this present life in all its fullness. Traditions about monasticism and isolation are reflections of short-term processes of training or development, monstrously misunderstood and grotesquely elaborated, to provide refuges for those who want to stay asleep. However improbable all this seems, it happens to be true. It is, of course, no less probable than many other things believed by man. Some such beliefs are certainly erroneous. We all know individuals with beliefs which we are convinced are erroneous. On the other hand, since Sufism depends upon effectiveness, not belief, Sufis are not concerned with inculcating and maintaining belief. I believe this is true is no substitute for this is how it is done. The two things are in reality, if not in appearance, poles apart. If man finds himself again, he will be able to increase his existence infinitely. If he does not, he may dwindle to vanishing point. Those who see a threat or promise in such a statement are unsuitable for this work. There is no threat or promise in facts, only in the interpretation man makes of them. People have been sent, from time to time, to try to serve man and save him from the blindness and sleep, which today would be better described as amnesia, which is always described in our technical literature as a local disease. These people are always in touch with the origin, and they bring the medicine which is half the cure. The other half, as in orthodox terrestrial medicine, is the activity of that which is acted upon, to attain its own regeneration with the minimum of aid. These cosmic doctors, a literal translation of a most ancient term, often live in the world almost unnoticed, like the camel in the desert. They have been of all races, and they have belonged to all faiths. Essentially, religion has two roles, which in all surviving systems have become confused through the absence of specialist knowledge in the publicists and most visible and active theoreticians. The first is to organize man in a safe, just, and peaceful manner, to establish and help maintain communities. The second is the inward aspect, which leads people from the outward stabilization to the performance which awakens them and helps to make them permanent. Numerous residual systems for human progress continue to float around in the world, but virtually all are devoid of value in this inner aspect, though they may not be without historical interest. Certainly they can show us at a glance that they are only employed for personal and community sentimental satisfactions, whatever their own imaginings about the matter may be. They can most charitably be described as vehicles abandoned by their builders and now occupied by half-comprehending amateurs who seek only a relief from thought about their predicament. The teaching, however, operated by those whom we call the wise, continues and may take any form. It is preserved intact and constantly nurtured by certain Sufis. Well-meaning but imitative groupings based on Sufism, and of no value to this inner side of the work, exist side by side with real ones. Recognizing a true master is possible only when the postulant, man or woman, is what we call sincere. This technical term refers to his condition, not his opinions. Sincere means that he is objective enough to recognize the specialist and the nature of the task. To reach this stage, the seeker has to learn to set aside, at least for a time, superficial assessment about the teachers, the teaching, and himself. By superficial, we mean something quite precise, automatic assumptions based upon rules employed in testing a different type of phenomenon. A person may be attracted to Sufism because of the wrong motives, such as curiosity, desire for power, fear, insecurity. But in spite of this, he has a chance to develop understanding of the work. If, however, he merely deepens his attachment and increases his acquisitiveness, he is not a Sufi, and is most unlikely to become one. He is taking and consuming smaller stimuli than he needs, though perhaps unable to prevent himself from craving such stimuli. Sufism has two main technical objectives. One, to show the man himself as he really is, and two, to help him develop his real inner self, his permanent part. Though man originates from far away, is asleep and may return after he has attained the means, he can do so only if he works from a sound environmental base in the world in which we find him. Our slogan is, "Be in the world, but not of the world." The Sufis, it is admitted on all sides by externalist students, have produced some of the world's greatest literature, particularly in tales, illustrative recitals, and poetry. Unlike professional literary workers, however, they see this as a means to work, not an end of their work. When the higher man does something worthy of admiration, it is an evidence of his mastership, not the object of it. A request. If you enjoyed this book, please review it on Amazon and Goodreads. Reviews are an author's best friend. To stay in touch with news on forthcoming editions of Idries Shah works, please sign up for the mailing list at bit.ly/ISF list. And to follow him on social media, please go to any of the following links: twitter.com/Idries Shah, facebook.com/Idries Shah, youtube.com/Idries Shah 999, pinterest.com/Idries Shah, bit.ly/IS Goodreads, and idriesshah.tumblr.com, or the main website at idriesshahfoundation.org. That was Thinkers of the East, Studies in Experientialism by Idries Shah. This work is copyright the estate of Idries Shah, all rights reserved, with copyright throughout the world. It was first published 1971 and published in this edition in 2016. The audiobook was narrated by David Ault.